So they're their own entities. So they're technically nonprofits, but they're fiscally sponsored, which means that they use the status of the university to be able to operate. They're able to move to a different nonprofit. It doesn't have to be within a university. It just so happens that it's always been easiest to associate with universities because you have researchers, right? And so if you're doing a bunch of social work and you have a bunch of social workers who are graduating, it's just an easy pipeline. So those organizations are the ones who develop licensure programs. They develop the curriculums. So a few years ago, as this law passed, I was rewriting the Texas mental health peer support curriculum, which basically meant that anybody in the state of Texas who wanted to be in peer support had to do my curriculum to be certified to do work with people in the state, which is kind of cool. They passed that law. And even though the law has nothing to do with my curriculum, I'm not part of a university. The organization I'm a part of is just fiscally sponsored, which in the law there's nothing that's like, and all fiscally sponsored entities must have this applicable. So they're actually outside of the law, but it's somewhat of a light gray area. Guess who wasn't even allowed to ask about pronouns in this curriculum? And ultimately, I don't know what they did with it afterwards, right? Because it's Texas. And also, so every single person who's being certified as a peer support specialist in the field of mental health, which is literally tens of thousands of people a year, will never get anything related to DEI because of a gray area, because of one law. And so when we think that things are separate, it's like, oh, well, they're targeting Palestinians here, or they're targeting trans people there, or they're targeting abortion here, or they're targeting disabilities here, or COVID here, or whatever it is. They apply to all of them. And without our movements fully understanding and fully acknowledging that, it just means that fascism takes a detour instead of us actually avoiding fascism. But how many spaces have y'all been in that actually honor and fully understand all of that? Versus the silos that so many of our orgs and spaces have. But ultimately, no one movement is ever going to create the revolution without that understanding, without us actually coming together and being like you could be a trans person and you could hate Palestinians. I don't care if you hate Palestinians. But if you don't know that you have to work with the pro-Palestine movement for your liberation, you're also stuck in fascism. And that goes across every identity. So a movement that's anti-Black, fascism. All the roads end up leading to fascism because of the lack of understanding. So I'm going to read a quick poem from the collection as I pour after I pour this tea. After, not as I pour this tea. I'm so excited for the tea. All right. All right. So if you have a copy of the book, it's on page 100. And one thing with Desecrated Poppies that's a little bit different than my other works is that most of the poetry in Desecrated Poppies is untitled because you cannot name a genocide. So it's page 100. You cannot be pro-Palestine and anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, anti-poor, anti-disabled, anti-trans at the same time. You can pretend, but you cannot claim liberation while feeding fascism. It is only a matter of time when the beast you fed grows and hunts you down. Be very afraid. Thank you. So, my head was like, is the tea ready? But it needs a few minutes. So, I really want to, with Desecrated Poppies, I really wanted to send the message of, and there's a couple of essays in Desecrated Poppies that will go into more detail about this, and then Whispers kind of picks up where that left off, is that there's an urgency to this, right? There will never be a single movement that does not embody all of it that will lead us to the revolution. And if we don't move to the revolution, then we're here. We're in what today looks like. We're in a world with genocide. And I'm not just talking about Palestine and Lebanon right now. I'm talking about genocide as a tool of settler colonialism that only goes away when settler colonialism goes away. And so Palestine can end up with a ceasefire. Gaza can have a ceasefire. Lebanon can have a ceasefire. The genocide can end in both of those places. But just because they ended is not liberation. Liberation isn't achieved in Gaza when the ceasefire happens. Liberation happens when not even just the settler state of Israel is dismantled, but when all settler colonialism is gone. Because without it being gone means that every single day we risk a new genocide. And that's assuming that all of the genocides have ended. Right? We're talking about over a dozen genocides happening today. Like as we speak. We're talking about Sudan. We're talking about the Congo. We're talking about Kashmir. We're talking about the endless genocide here. We're talking about so many different places. And then other places that we barely talk about, like West Papua, right? The list goes on and on. If we imagine all of those are done, that still does not get us to liberation without settler colonialism being gone, because it's a tool of it. It's like breathing for settler colonialism. It's always a part of it. Settler colonialism cannot exist without genocide. If we end all genocide forever, settler colonialism just does not live in the world. It's that simple. They have that kind of direct relationship between them. So I'm going to read a couple of other poems. Yeah, let's read the second one, and then I'll read yours after. Well, I found out because there's one left. So Adrian picked a third poem for y'all. And I will say, usually, this is actually the first time that I've pulled things out beforehand. And I was like, I feel like I want to read these. And they're poems that I haven't read in many spaces with this book. But I want to read this poem on page 143. And again, this one's untitled. So one thing with Desecrated Poppies is that this entire time, since its publication, even before that, I've been talking about it as just this understanding of the connections, right? Of they're one and the same. They're not even just connected, they are just one thing. They might look different to you, but they're the same exact thing. And at a recent event, I realized that not only does this book do that, but it also humanizes organizers. Specifically, it humanizes me to myself as an organizer. And so in between all of these poems around the rise of fascism and how all these things are connected, there are also some really beautiful poetry about claiming different pieces of who I am, different experiences, both related to the genocide and that extend outside of it. Kind of like reminders of that we're still human. Yes, every single person here needs to do a ton to move us towards liberation, right? My expectations are pretty high for everyone. And also at the same time, outside of that, of like, there's a humanity within us, and it's fueling that humanity that lets you do even more, that lets you show up even more wholeheartedly. Because when you're whole, like, what's white supremacy going to do? But when we're so fractured, when there's so little of me that even I know, that I have access to, there's limited ways of how I can show up. So this one's on page 143. They say nice tan. I don't know how to explain that my melanin was a gift returned from the sun. No tan lines underneath the fabulous garments I wear. How do I explain that as soon as the sun hits my skin, my ancestors remember me, embracing all I am? I remember in grade school, we would compete to figure out who was the whitest. Of course, it was always the kid with a white parent. No one told us it's okay to be brown and black in Islamic school. The Levantian teachers pitting us against one another, denying our identities if we weren't light enough. The half-white Palestinian was the only permitted Palestinian to the Palestinian teachers. I was too dark to be Palestinian. So I stopped being anything. Just a dark brown, genderless child, invisible and disposable, except in the ways I made for myself. Then, robbed of my melanin, I became too light to be of color and too dark to be anywhere near white. My skin forgotten, my ancestry lost until I claimed it without validation. I am queer. Not only due to gender and orientation, I am queer. Invisible between shades of brown, too dark, too light. The sun and the moon in endless cycles, fuck your validation. I want to say. I never desired it, but that's not true. I wonder what a childhood where I am held would have been like, or a world where I am held even as an adult. Thank you. I literally have never read that one out loud. But it's so good. I love it. Y'all are welcome. You just are. Sips tea. So those are the poems that are like some of my favorites in this collection, because I completely forgot that I wrote them. I almost erased them out of my own book because, you know, if you've been following along in my life this last year, I will write something and then that's kind of it. The time I look back at something is when I read it to the public. Because this book was written April, the week of the eclipse, so starting April 10th to about a week. And it was at the start of the eclipse going into that I was in Chicago for a few days, and then it was done on the flight back. Whispers Beneath the Orange Grove, I wrote the same week that this book came out while I was in Norway. So June 20th to the 30th, maybe the 1st of July. Who knows dates? But I remember which country and states I write things in. But so by the time this came out, I was already having to write the next book to talk about the next things that need to come after this stuff. And so between all of that, you're kind of limited in going back and being like, oh yeah, this is absolutely fantastic. Everyone's welcome. I still do that in events, but it's usually just in events. But I find it really fascinating and speaks a lot to organizing culture and kind of, I'll be just really honest, of my mentality and my mental health and where I've been these last few months, of that I erased all of the personal poems from my memory. I remember every single poem about fascism, right? I remember the ones that tell you that fascism is rising and what happens after fascism and what happens before and during and so on and so forth. I remember the essays, but the poems that talk about yearning and dreams and where I want to be and where I go, even like the level of depth in the center poem of this collection, which is a conversation with my inner child, those are the poems I completely forgot. They're my favorite poems of all time. I absolutely adore these poems, and also I forget that they exist until I pick up a copy. And I want to put that out there because I think a lot of us are so lost in the work sometimes that we forget that we exist also. That we exist within the work, that we exist outside of the work, that we exist during the work, that we just exist. That we are also people with inner children who have hopes and dreams, that we yearn for things, that we desire things, and yes, we're pissed off that not everyone's responding to those things. That over a year later, people still don't get it. And over a year later, people who do get it are still treating people who don't get it as if that's okay. And I'm not saying everyone needs to cut everyone off. I'm just saying cut off most people. If someone's giving you money, don't cut them off. Otherwise, let's cut people off. That's obviously a generalization, and generalizations are true sometimes. So I'm going to read one more poem that Adrian chose, and I love this one. This poem is more around, where do I start with this? So if you've read Blood Orange, there's a poem called Questions in the Desert during an eclipse. It's the longest title I've ever had. And it's these random questions, and the last one in particular is, if joy is resistance, how much ecstasy do I need to free Palestine? And it's interesting that so many people have held on to that quote. Like, I've heard from people that random musicians have recited it at music festivals, which is kind of interesting and cool. But every single time I would read that poem at a live reading, someone in the audience, and I will say, it was always a white person in the audience, who would be like, tell us about joy as resistance. And this was always my response. So it's on page 54. People ask me about rest as resistance, joy as resistance. I ask back, what's rest? Whose joy? I ask again, which resistance to what? My rest is resistance, because it has never been permitted. My joy is resistance because it has been criminalized. My resistance is to claim a world where that is no longer the case. Where my people, any people, can rest without genocide at our doorsteps. Where my people can be joyful without being kidnapped, trafficked, killed. Our joy, our rest, is not the same. When your joy and rest have always been accessible. Just because you don't know how to feel joy and how to rest doesn't change that. Thank you. So this isn't to say that nobody is allowed to have joy and rest as resistance. This is being just very specific. Let's actually break down language. If you're saying joy as resistance, let's be clear, like, why is that a form of resistance for you as an individual or for your community? And it's either that you don't know enough yet about it, and it's something for you to go and look into, because maybe your people's joy has been criminalized, and you don't know that. Maybe one day it used to be, maybe it is today. Or maybe it's no longer the case today, but it used to be, or it never was the case ever. And same with rest. We're not all the same. Part of the reason that I have that answer to people, and part of the reason that I have this poem in here, is because when more privileged people are like, rest as resistance and joy as resistance, that means I have to do more labor because you just took a month off. I'm here for people taking breaks. But for you to go and be like, this party is a form of rest as resistance, but everyone at the party is white or cis or straight or whatever levels of privilege, it means I have more labor now. This isn't saying do not take breaks. This is saying don't weaponize language that's actively harmful. Say you want to go party. Go party. But do not claim that a party is saving my people. And I say this not just for the most privileged of even like sometimes marginalized communities will also use the same language. And it's like, yes, one day that was the case, and also that's not today. And again, this isn't saying do not take breaks, because I talk about taking breaks quite a lot in the next book. Breaks are essential. We are needed in this movement long term. If you're here to martyr yourself, fabulous. You are welcome to martyr yourself, just be incredibly strategic about it. If you don't know how, ask questions. But for most people, us staying long-term in the movement is the most strategic thing. It's the harder thing for a lot of us. But that also means that we do need breaks, that we need to step back, that we need to do different things, and there's beautiful, healthy ways to do that. So I am pro-rest. I am pro-joy. Let's just be really, really clear. Who's rest? Who's joy? What are we resisting? Because if you can't name what you're resisting with those things, we're not actually resisting. The intentionality is gone. It's just another party that someone like me now has to go and do more work. Because I do get really annoyed with a lot of other places where they're like, all organizers can come for free to this party. I'm like, you took away all of my organizers. All of them. So yes, it's free for me, but like, you think with no one on the front lines anymore that I will take a break? And y'all, it's always about me. And so like, people just need to be more mindful of that. They should create a Yaffa party only. Everyone else does more labor. Right? If you really want a joyous resistance party, everyone privileged needs to go and do more work that day so we can go and party. We're not opposed to partying, but I need someone to do the labor. If you're not mindful of that, then I have to do the labor, and we don't like that because I have enough labor. I am good. I'm satisfied. I have my abundance of labor. Let's spread it out a little bit. So I want to move to Whispers Beneath the Orange Grove, which is this book. This is my favorite cover. It was just released, thank you. It was just released whenever October 7th was. I don't know how many weeks it's been, almost like 2 weeks ago. And this is the book that was written immediately after Desecrated Poppies. So this one was written, the vast majority of it was written in those 10 days in Norway. And then 2 essays in particular, no, 3 essays, so it's 8 essays. So 5 essays were written in Norway. I think a 6th was also written in Norway, but then that wasn't included. It's going to be included in a different thing. And so the other 3, 2 of them were written in Palestine. So after Norway, yeah, I went for the very first time to Palestine this summer for my birthday. It was all kinds of things. It was amazing. But I wrote 2 essays in Palestine for this collection. There's a different whole collection that was also written in Palestine, but we don't know when that will happen. So there's other things. And then the last one was actually written a couple of weeks after October 7th last year. And I want to talk a little bit about some of these different ones, because this book in particular is kind of like the next step after Desecrated Poppies, or after understanding certain things, right? It's like, okay, so you understand that these things are the same, you understand they're all connected, you understand that like they're coming after all of us, even if they're not directly coming after all of us. But they're still coming after all of us because it will apply to me if they come after you today. And it is applying. That Whispers Beneath the Orange Grove is kind of like, okay, all of this is happening, And here's some more detail about like the more intimate violence that's happening, that the state does, that the community does, that a lot of different things do. But like, what do we do? Right? How do we actually strategize? How do we move underground? What do we do when they come for us? Whoever it is that we're talking about, and it breaks that down, how do we actually be here long term? Because again, like we started, of like, y'all, I'm exhausted. I don't know anyone who's not exhausted. And so if we're not careful, none of us will be here. And that's happened historically, right? It's happened over the last several decades where it's generation after generation after generation of people doing this work and then gone. And then one or two stay, which is why we don't have a lot of cross-generational or intergenerational spaces. And even just in the last year, with the levels of harm that have happened, there's a lot of people who are like, I will never organize within this space ever again. If you've noticed, there's a lot less encampments right now. It's not because encampments aren't needed. And yes, part of it is that universities are restricting things even more. But the part that we don't talk about is that the vast majority of encampments, and I've worked with dozens of encampments this past year, and historically beyond that, a lot of them, the core organizers will never step into a room together at this point. But we don't talk about that piece as much, but I talk about it all the time. And it's in the book. So I want to read a couple things from this. I want to start with just the very last paragraph in the book, actually. Because I think it also, to me, it's why this information is so important and how we actually really move into it. So the last essay in this collection is called Yearning for Utopia. And keep in mind, this was written before Inada. That essay was written pre-Inada. The only book that exists prior to it would be Blood Orange. But this essay was written like that in November, right? Probably around a month after, maybe less. It's hard to tell those days. I think we're in February. And so over a year ago is not, or a year ago is, I'm not going to remember anything. But I know it was written a year ago. So it's on page 120 in this book. It's the very final paragraph. Actually, I'm going to read the final two paragraphs. I wasn't even paying attention to the paragraph before this paragraph, but I'm like, this is a sexy paragraph. Let's read this paragraph too. I yearn for utopia, and even more so, I yearn to build with others. Utopia is not mine. It is not for a single person or community. It is for all of us. I read the names of cousins, second cousins, and third cousins on lists procured because the leader of the free world said, I have no confidence in the number that Palestinians are using. In the last 3 weeks, so it was 3 weeks after October 7th, we figured it out. In the last 3 weeks, every one of my identities has been weaponized as a way to justify my people's genocide. My genocide. You might wonder, how can I think of utopia as the world is falling apart? It is as the world falls that it is made anew. As a death doula, I know that death is a beginning. Mourn the old world and usher in a new one. Let it be a better world. I wanted to share that because when I wrote that essay, and I was reminded by this a little bit earlier today, I did a live with an incredible person. All of you should follow her, follow Rachel. All of it is on my Instagram. This essay was written as a submission to a magazine at the time that was trying to center Palestinian voices. And it was rejected. Exactly, I know, the audacity, the sheer audacity. But I'm glad it was rejected. But it was rejected, and I don't know why. It could have been the trans fabulousness thing. Not everyone can handle this level of fabulousness. Unfortunately, it's their loss. But I think the larger part of it, if I was really going to guess, is that a month into the genocide, the mainstream pro-Palestine movement wasn't ready for this conversation. The people who were having this conversation were the people at the margins of the movement. So Inada happened after this, immediately after it, like a month later. Inada's 18 queer and trans Palestinians writing about a free Palestine. Every single story in it is set in a free Palestine. Queer and trans Palestinians were talking about this. We're able to get together and have this conversation, but I don't know a single cis straight Palestinian who was able to have that conversation back then. I barely know anyone now, a year into this. And so I think for that publication, right, they're like, no one's going to relate to this because they're used to being stuck in pain for so long, but the most marginalized of the most marginalized always know how to move forward. We know none of this is the end. We know that ends are beginnings, and we know that sometimes ends are actually really, really, really wonderful because, y'all, this shit needs to end. But we can't begin anew with it still here. That doesn't make sense. You can't replace something as it still stands. We can't just make things a little bit better, and people who are the most marginalized within a marginalized group know that. We've lived that every single day. And so I wanted to share that to start off this conversation with this book because, to me, reading all of this or writing all of this or doing any of this is never about getting stuck in devastation. I talk about a lot of things that are wrong with the world in this book. I talk about a lot of things that are wrong in the world in all of the books except Inada. There is a lot wrong in the world. But it's not about that. It's about what is it that we're doing to move forward, right? And the reality is the fact that we're still here means it's not enough. Whether it's us here or us as communities, we're not showing up fully, right? And it's always interesting to me to like be in spaces where people are like specifically when people bring God into genocide. Right? And I understand religious trauma. I understand like not everyone is here for spirituality and that religion's not spirituality and all of that. And also the amount of spaces that I will be in where someone's like, oh, God is letting this happen and it's so horrible. And I'm like, ma'am, you're not willing to give up your 401k. But like God is the problem? Like, I don't care what you believe in, who you believe in, like, I don't care. And also, I'm like, you've shown up to one protest, but God needs to fix this? Because if God did fix this, God makes it all go away, we go back to October 6th. We go back to other invisible genocides. We go back to literally the world dying if things do not change. But that's used so often in so many spaces I am in. Everyone's like, oh my God, it's God. Someone literally was like, I now believe in God because God must be sadistic to allow this to happen. And I'm like, what? I mean, believe what you want to believe. That's cute. And also, but like, what are you doing? What are we all doing? Because we're not doing enough. And this isn't saying that you individually have to do more. It's also saying that. But it's not necessarily the focus of like you, just as one person has to do more. It's you as your community has to go and do more. We are all extensions of our communities. If I include Palestinians into my community, Palestinians need to also do more. If I include all trans people in my community, then trans people need to do more. The thing is, if I go and do way more, right? If I give up every single thing that I have, it doesn't matter in the long run because I have just martyred myself non-strategically. Again, I'm totally here for strategic martyring. But be strategic. If you can't tell, there's an essay called On Strategy in the book. So I'm not just telling you be strategic, and then I'm like, go figure out how to do that. No, be strategic by reading the essay on strategy and figure out how to be really, really, really strategic. And from all the other essays, figure out how to be really, really strategic with your power. Because y'all, from my vantage point, like, we're not being strategic across the vast majority of spaces. We're really not. And that's on all of us. Some more than others, but it's on all of us. There's accountability always when our communities fail. Community accountability is not one person is awful. It's literally like our entire community. If I'm going to say you are in my community, I will hold you accountable. And it is your job to hold me accountable. Otherwise, we're not in community. We're just maybe sort of friends. Maybe sort of. We're acquaintances. Whatever words mean. But we have to be able to show up in all of those ways, and that includes holding our communities accountable, holding the people around us accountable. Whatever that looks like for you and your community, but it has to be happening. But y'all, community accountability is not happening. Like across the vast majority of communities, it is not happening. And it's so easy for it to happen. Is it uncomfortable? Yes. Let me tell you why it's uncomfortable. I wasn't going to go here, but we're going here. Let me tell you why it's uncomfortable. Because you're not used to it. Anything you are not used to, you are going to be uncomfortable with. That's how our brains work. Our brain is like, what the fuck is this? You want me to have a conversation when this person did me wrong? Or did this person wrong? And obviously there's a spectrum of wrong. Wrong could be this person was 5 minutes late to a thing, or wrong could be this person murdered my brother. I don't have a brother. But like, those are different levels. I'm not saying if someone murders your sibling, go and be like, let's talk. I mean, yes, but like as a broader community, and it's other people's jobs to go and have that conversation instead of you. However, someone is 5 minutes late and you're like, I hate you now. Maybe let's talk. Someone does something that makes you feel uncomfortable. I'm not talking about assaults here, right? I'm talking about the things that actually are happening within our movements that aren't those things. I don't usually get called in around conflict transformation because a giant harm has happened. No one has killed anyone. I'm sure someone has killed someone somewhere. But like within the movements, that hasn't happened. From like the situations I get is, well, this person worked with that person and I don't like that person, and so I will never work with this person ever again. Y'all, that is not harm. But even if there is harm within a spectrum, we need to be able to address things. But it's going to be uncomfortable because we're not used to doing it. And our brains like what they're used to. But little by little, when you practice it, it's more and more comfortable. I really want to invite y'all, wherever you are, if you're online or here, I want us to get over this idea of I need to be comfortable. Don't be comfortable. Do it anyways. Do things. Was it always comfortable for me to be like, y'all are welcome. This poetry is bomb. And these essays are amazing. And y'all need to go and fix the world now. You're welcome. It wasn't always the most comfortable. But I do events like every other day. Now they're fine. Be uncomfortable and do shit anyways. Be uncomfortable and have these conversations with the people that we claim are loved ones instead of disposing of a community member potentially. If you're willing to dispose of a person, they are not of your community. I don't care what's happened. I don't care the level of harm that's happened. If someone is truly a community member, they cannot actually be disposable. This isn't saying that we can't restrict people and be like, hey, I need you to understand that you have actually done harm, and until you have done harm, you are not welcome to sit with us at Busboys and Poets. This is saying that when that person is like, you know, I fucked up, and I want to get better, I want to do better next time, but we're like, no. You still can't sit with us because remember you walked with that person one time and we hate that person. And those are like real examples. Like I'm going to give y'all oh my God, I'm going to give y'all an example of a conflict that has happened. And I won't go into specifics, but we're going to name people person A, person B, person C, person D. That's letters. Person A goes and assaults someone. No. Person A, no. Where do we even start? Person B is dating person A, or has dated person A. Person A, prior to them dating, assaulted somebody that's not person A or B. Person B is not with person A anymore. The community, whatever we want to call that, whoever that is, just a group of people, now are going after person B for dating person A because how dare they date person B without knowing about this assault, not clear on timelines even, but this person now needs to be canceled because they dated a person who has assaulted someone. So they themselves have never assaulted anyone. They were not with this person when this assault happened. They have nothing to do with this assault, except for the fact that they have dated person A. Now, this is 8 years ago. It's a long story, time-wise. Now, person C is friends with person B around Palestine. They are organizing together. Community, again, group of random people online, now are targeting person C because how dare person C be friends with person B who was never held accountable for person A's actions. Now, this person they're trying to cancel this person. So then person D, myself, gets a message or multiple messages being like, you need to now be held accountable because you did not hold person C accountable for holding person B accountable for holding person A accountable. But no one is talking to person A. No one's even talking to person B at this point. Person C and person D, myself, are both Palestinian. The reason person C is targeted is because they're organizing with person B. The reason I am targeted is because I'm organizing with person C. Do I even know the name of person A? I do now, but not when all of this started. It took me like 2 months to figure out what is a name. Now, at the same time though, right, of like, it's wild, right? Ridiculous, but very real and has immense consequences. And so person B fully leaves the pro-Palestine movement. Person C barely holds on to do a lot of work to keep them in the movement. Person D is me. I'm used to being targeted, but also it impacts all of us, right? There's only so much of this targeting that can happen where it's like, y'all, really? For something that none of us involved are, like, even know the names of people involved. And also, it's not even like the unnamed person who was assaulted, who's coming after person C or person D or even person B back in the day. It's other people. And they're like, oh, well, we heard about this. But now at the same time, I do transformative justice stuff. And so I'm also connected to people who know how to mediate these processes, who know how to go and have conversations. And so even though no mediation ever happened, so person C and that group did not get on good terms or whatever. However, this person was able to go to the group of people and be like, hey, let's talk. Like, what's happening? And through conversation, they stopped targeting person C and person D. Because they realized, oh wait, actually, we're supposed to be redirecting this to person A. That is the only place you're allowed to direct it. Otherwise, you're bullying and harassing people. But a conversation made that happen. Lots of consequences, but a conversation made that happen. So yes, ridiculousness is happening, and also conversation does help. Like, we're able to actually move forward and move away from these things. I don't remember why we got into that, but like, y'all are welcome. Because the sheer ridiculousness of things that happen sometimes. So I'm going to read a little bit more from one of the other essays, and then I will open it up to questions. So this, which essay even is this? This essay is called When They Come For Us, which I don't know if it was one of my favorites to write or not, but I like the title. So it's on page 80, and we'll read a couple of pages. The second enormous lie, and I want you to try to figure out what the first enormous lie is, until you get the book, and then you'll have to go back and figure it out. I didn't even look what it is. I don't remember. But the second enormous lie is that white Christian nationalists are uneducated, unorganized, uncoordinated, and a lot of things. The reality is that the leaders of white Christian nationalism are the people who developed areas of academic studies. And they don't need to be perfectly organized and coordinated. Throw $1 billion into a project and it will be somewhat effective. Our oppression doesn't need to be perfect. We have to be efficient and effective because to their $1 billion, we have 100,000. I don't even know if it's that much, to be honest. For every policy they have to fall back on, we have a police officer's knee on our necks. For every dollar we fundraise for community care, we have FBI intimidation, forcing our care work underground. They have billions, the CIA, FBI, the UN, the EU, nearly every international agency, hundreds of years of infrastructure, the police, and almost every politician. We have a community invested with infiltrators worldwide. Yeah. We have to be efficient and effective. Our survival is dependent on it. On the other hand, the greatest threat to their survival is themselves. Unfortunately, the greatest threat to our survival is also us, but always through them. Counterintelligence programs within empire have always targeted movement leaders and community members to wreak havoc amongst our own. In turn, we are told that speaking publicly puts our people at risk. Every day I am told the genocide is my fault as a trans person because trans people need to be saved, and at the same time my fault because I'm somehow also an FBI infiltrator leading to my people's genocide due to community violence. They have power over us in the shadows. Today, it does not matter if a community member is an infiltrator or not, for the consequences are often the same. State violence runs deep within our communities and our minds. We are born within this system and all require immense deconditioning to be able to be with one another outside of their shadows. They will weaponize us against one another regardless. We can make their narratives irrelevant and powerless by having conversations that allow us to challenge one another and hold the complexity of life within settler colonialism. We are not the same, and they can only weaponize that against us when we are unwilling to accept it. They will come for us within and outside of our communities. They are already coming. They have been for centuries. Are you ready? Thank you. So that's the end of that essay, and then we move to an essay called We Move Underground. But we're not going to move underground today. Y'all can read that later. So I feel like a lot of the theme of today has been have conversations. And this isn't a wait until everything has fallen apart to go and have conversations. This is your community is fabulous, everyone loves each other, and everything is great. Go to a dinner table and be like, anti-blackness. Now, we need to deal with it. And people are going to be like, oh, but nothing has happened, we're so cute. Be like, yes, to maintain cuteness, we talk about it. And then it won't actually be a problem. We need to be having these conversations with our loved ones. If we are not, it falls apart. And I want to recognize and own that that is a difficult task. And not everyone is willing to listen to these things. And it's not just about forms of discrimination and violence. It's not just about anti-blackness and ableism and all of these other things that could be a part of our community, but it's also going to our people and be like, you are not okay. What can I take off of your plate so that you can take a break? And what does a break look like for you, and how do we make this happen? Not everyone will listen. The amount of times that I have gone to people and I have been like, yeah, you're not okay. And I ask those questions, and the person's like, no, I'm fine. We can check in a few weeks. They are in a mental health facility by the end of that week. It happens. to every single community. How many of y'all are familiar with the concept of harm reduction? Fabulous, everybody. How many of y'all are familiar with the concept of suicide and harm reduction as the same thing? Fabulous. Well, not as the same. Harm reduction within the realm of suicide. Fabulous. Every single action that we take has consequence. Whether positive, negative, it doesn't matter, right? The concept of harm reduction is how do you take something that's going to happen or has a high probability of happening, and how do you reduce the harm of it as much as possible? If you are an organizer, I need you to plan for the day that you will be burned out. Depending on the connection that you have with your body and mind and all of that, you might be able to give a pretty accurate date. Others might not be. Some people will be like, I will be fine for another year. Again, hospital within a week. But plan for that day. Plan it out of what happens when Yaffa can no longer do these talks. Right? Because if I am not doing these talks, then some communities are not having these conversations. And unfortunately, not everyone's having these conversations, right? You don't hear about this every single day. If I am fully out of the game entirely, then I am no longer writing relevant books that are timely and that need to be digested immediately. If I am not doing this work, then the community care that happens through the profits of the books isn't going to people that need them most. And so the first three books, so Blood Orange, Inara, and Desecrated Poppies, all of the profits from those go to queer and trans Palestinians in Palestine, right? In the last 11 months, has it been 11 months? 11 months, that's over $100,000. If I am no longer doing this, there's no money going there. Desecrated Poppies goes to queer and trans people indigenous to Turtle Island. But if that's not happening, then that's not happening. Harm reduction is me being like, actually, you know what? I know my body. I know I can only do this until early December. I will need a couple months off. If I burn out, here's what needs to happen with this. Maybe it's I'm relying on other organizers and they're going to do marketing campaigns, or they're just going to sell books in their communities without me being there. They're like, your body's broken. It is currently fully on the floor. You're about to become a puddle. Do not fly over. We're going to sell books. And a bunch of communities have done that, which is absolutely beautiful. Maybe it's that someone else is the one who's involved with all the admin things to be able to actually send the funds. Maybe it's someone else on the ground who's owning all of the relationship building to be able to get money to a trans-Palestinian in Gaza. Right? Because it's not as easy as me being like, I just want to give money to a trans-Palestinian in Gaza. Financial systems change literally every couple of weeks, and I have to find a new way of getting money into Gaza. That is labor. So maybe someone else is doing that labor. Maybe that labor just gets split between community. And so if I burn out on a Tuesday, actually, most of it is fine. We have reduced the harm that's possible. But if I don't do any of that, and the book goes into all of this and letting go. If I don't do that, we've just lost a huge lifeline into this movement. And this isn't even just because I'm like, yeah, my work is amazing. It is amazing. But your work is also amazing, ideally. I don't know all y'all's work. If it's not amazing, get it together. But ideally, it's already amazing, and it can be even more amazing. But also, if you are gone tomorrow, all that amazing work is gone. And again, this isn't telling you do not take breaks. This is saying do harm reduction so that you can take even more breaks. Because if I have people I can count on in all of these things, I can take a break. I'm going to take a break. But if I have no one, y'all have met organizers. Try to convince an organizer to take a break when no one's going to take their labor. It doesn't happen until they are in a hospital or worse, right? It doesn't happen until things are so much worse than they could be. So practice harm reduction in this work. And even if you're like, actually, I'm doing great. I have a great support system. Everything is so fabulous and wonderful. Plan for a day when you're not there anymore. Because even if you don't burn out, wonderful. I love that for you. I love that for all of us. Let's not burn out. but I could get hit by a bus, right? Or, you know what? Like, other things happen. Life happens. How many of our lives fully stopped, as in nothing bad outside of the genocide has happened to us in the last year and half a month? Oh no, like we've lost people outside of genocide, right? We've lost housing potentially, we've lost work, we've lost all these things, some consequences to genocide, a lot outside of those consequences of genocide. Life doesn't stop just because a genocide is happening. Bad things still happen. And so something random could happen that just stops everything. So plan for that day so that we're ready and we're prepared. And the more of us that do it, the more space that we have, the more capacity that we have. If it's only a few people who do it, if I only do it with like 2 other people, right? What happens on their bad day? And that happens, right? Where you're like, everything is fabulous. There's 4 of us. We're good with capacity. Something big has happened. We are no longer good with capacity. We are over capacity. The system is overwhelmed. It needs to be rebooted. But when it's more and more and more people, that's when we're actually able to be like, actually, yeah, like not only am I taking breaks, but I'm going to elevate the work that I do because of those breaks. Every time I go on a break, or not on a break, it doesn't matter. Basically, I just end up with a new book. Y'all want me on breaks. You also just want me around eclipses. Me and eclipses get along really well for writing. So half these books were written during eclipses. Yeah, final thing before I open it to questions. No, actually, I'll read this in the very end. Questions? Thank you. And you're welcome to ask about any of the books and other things that we didn't discuss, if that wasn't obvious. But I know I answer everything before it's even asked, and so you're welcome. Yes. What do you think stops people from taking? So I talk about this in Letting Go, and there's a couple of things that I highlight in there. So some of the big ones that I would want to bring attention, because there's a lot of things, right? There's like reinforcement of capitalism, right? Capitalism tells us a break is a very specific thing. It's usually really harmful. There's all of that deconditioning that needs to happen. But one of the biggest things right now that is preventing people from taking breaks is that people feel it's unconscionable to take a break. Right? So if I take a break as my family is dying, I'm a horrible, horrible human being. That survivor's guilt is so strong within people that they think that if they take a break, they are now to blame for all of this. And so I think a lot of us can relate to that in a lot of ways, probably. It's a pretty universal thing for depending on where you are in your journey, but for a lot of people, we experience that. The thing with that is when you really need a break, y'all, our brains are magic. They are incredible. Your brain is like, I gave you the option to take a conscious break. You didn't. I will break you now. And what that leads to, one of the things that leads to is that a lot of the conflict actually comes from that. A lot of people who really just need a break are causing a lot of conflict, and a part of it is because if it ends in flame and you become the problem and I have to step away, it's your fault. I can feel okay now for taking a break, but we have now burned all of these bridges. So for me, like that's one of the big ones of that survivor's guilt, and just feeling that it's unconscionable to take breaks versus that it's actually your responsibility to take breaks. And I tell people this, especially leaders, of like, And not even take breaks because things are bad. You take breaks because it's a Tuesday. Because if you don't take a break, right, that harm reduction that we talked about, right, if I come to all of you and I'm like, okay, I need you to pick up this thing. I need you to pick up this thing. You're picking up this thing. You're going to pick up that thing. Everyone's picking up a different piece. But then I don't go to a break in a year. How many of y'all are going to know to pick those pieces up in a year? But if I tell you, pick up this thing, and I'm like, and I'm going away next Tuesday, I need you to do it. Now you have the opportunity to practice it. Now you have the opportunity to actually be responsible for it, to actually hold it, to actually do this labor and this work. And so to me, it's not even when things are bad, it's literally how we allow other people to be a part of the work that we're doing. Because if I don't do that, you're not going to actually know what to do when like, I have fallen apart, and you're like, oh my God, Yaffa was also my rock, but Yaffa now is gone. That sudden nature of it isn't going to comfort you. You're not going to be like, oh yay, I feel so good. But if I'm going to hot springs and I'm still accessible, when you try this and something goes wrong and you're like, hey Yaffa, how are hot springs? This is really bad. That's different. That feels better. And the next time, you actually don't need me. And the time after that, and whatever it is. But there's a multitude of reasons why people don't take breaks. Again, capitalism is a huge piece of it. But I do really want to highlight that like unconscionable nature of breaks. Or that, to be honest, it's also, we don't always know how to go on healthy breaks. So, like this happened last year, for example, in like last December, right? And so I organize both within organizations, I organize outside of organizations, I organize on the ground, I organize in a lot of different spaces. One thing that happened with organizations in particular is it's a Tuesday, we're having an organizing meeting, we're talking about all these cool things. Wednesday, I get a return email saying, we are on our winter vacation for the next month. None of those orgs had mentioned this. But now all of them are out for an entire month. And I'm like, wait, we just talked about all of this. They were assuming that it's in over a month, but it's a genocide. And so now I have to do the labor of all of y'all organizations. And that doesn't feel great, right? That's not how we build relationships. I'm not going to go and be like, oh my God, I love you so much now. Versus, hey, Yaffa, we want to go on break. And we want to make sure that you go on break. How do we stagger this? How do we do this in a healthy way where us going on break is not fully disruptive and we communicate it? Or literally even of like, we just want to go on break. These are the dates that we're going to go on break. We wanted to give you as much notice as possible so that we can plan ahead of time for us going on break. That is healthy. That's not what usually happens. And so it's almost like breaks have become violent in different ways, both to people trying to take them and the people who are around those people trying to take them. And so it just, psychologically, it's just not, unfortunately, but it's so easy. Communicate, we can talk. And also, survivor's guilt is something a lot of us have experienced. And also, y'all, we don't have time. We don't have time. Have survivor's guilt. It's a Tuesday. Do what you need to do on a Tuesday. With survivor's guilt, write me a book. I don't have time otherwise, right? Like, we have shit to do. I want to honor that survivor's guilt is very valid, and it is a thing. It is an experience that a lot of us have. But same with that discomfort. Who cares? We have it. Wonderful. It's a Tuesday. Let's do things anyways. Let's feel survivor's guilt as I'm on a book tour. Let's feel it at an event. Let's feel it as I write. Let's feel it as we go on the streets. Let's feel it. Feel it. But to feel it and to be incapacitated and to just stop everything, there's a problem there. To me, that means that you haven't found the thing that you're yearning to be doing in this moment. And there's a billion different things for all of us to be doing in this moment. It's a day that you don't want to get out of your house. Fabulous. Don't get out of the house for Palestine. Do something in the house. You don't want to go out, or you want to go out. Fabulous. Go out and do it for Palestine and do something there. And when I say Palestine, I mean everywhere, right? Not just the one place. Have the feelings. But it's when those feelings become so powerful that they immobilize us. It means there's something else there. It means you're struggling to figure out what to do. And so try everything. Do it all. In whatever capacity that looks like for you. But y'all, we don't have the time. And you not doing anything for a week with survivor's guilt is not a break. I want to just highlight that. It's the same with I remember saying this to one of my sisters for the first time years and years ago, maybe 10 years ago, where she was like, oh, I'm procrastinating so much, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to take my break tomorrow because I took it today. And I was like, procrastination is not a break. If your mind is over hyper, trying to do something and it feels incapable of doing it, it's the opposite of a break. Feeling overwhelmed, whether through survivor's guilt or any of the other things that get us overwhelmed, which is valid. We all have the right to be overwhelmed, but fabulous. Be overwhelmed and go march. Be overwhelmed and write a book. Be overwhelmed and make a movie. I don't care what you do, but be overwhelmed doing it, that's fine. We all have that right to be overwhelmed, but when you're overwhelmed and now you've been out of the movement for the last month, that was not a break. That hasn't helped you. That actually made things way worse. Times when you can't actually show up are the most harmful to our body minds. I say that because if that is the case for you, I want you to not think of it as a break. You are still in need of a break. And breaks are not bad. If you're like, hey, I'm getting overwhelmed and actually I do need to go to hot springs and not think about this and do this, that's valid. That is a real break. Survivor's guilt is not a break. Survivor's guilt is I want to show up more. I don't know how to show up today. And so I'm sitting here overwhelmed by all of these emotions and I'm incapable of moving, which is not a break. It is the opposite. So you still need a break. You probably need more of a break because of how overwhelmed you are. And you may have noticed that of people who are doing more are not more overwhelmed than everybody else. We get overwhelmed when community conflict happens. We get overwhelmed when people start targeting us, when the FBI comes towards our door and the community doesn't want to talk about it, right? Or we're punished because we're talking about it. We get overwhelmed by those things when you're actively doing things. But if you're feeling too overwhelmed to do things and you're stuck in that, you're more overwhelmed. You actually need a break even more. So maybe it's actually, you need a break first, and then you're like, okay, I'm taking 2 weeks off where I am not sitting with the survivor's guilt as like, this is what's keeping me away. It's no, that I will not do these things for 2 weeks as a intentional break. And then you're gonna go and do things, whatever that looks like for you. Other questions? We'll take one more. I have no idea what time it is. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. It's a great question. Two thoughts come to mind. One, the safety piece, which I'll get to. But the first is build it for the absolute most marginalized of that group. it's not meant to be safe for everyone. And I'll get to like the safety component in just a sec, but it's not all women of color are equal. Women of color are not the same, right? Who's the most marginalized out of women of color within the group or outside of the group on the campus if it's for all of them on campus? In most campuses, it's going to be Black and Indigenous women. It's going to be trans women, right? And so then if you're creating a space that's actually safe for a Black trans woman, and I'll get to safety in a sec, right? But if you're building a space with that person in mind, it's for trans Black women, that's who's centered, you'll actually have other people within it. Because if you build a space that's accessible or that's centering the person, the most marginalized and the most marginalized, everyone else is able to come along. When you build a space for like a medium point of privilege and marginalization, everyone more marginalized can't be in that space, everyone more privileged can. And so always start from like, who's the most marginalized that could exist on this campus and build it for that person. The point that I wanted to make around the safety piece, safety is not something that can be guaranteed. And so when you try to create a space that's going to be safe for everyone, such as women of color, you will always set yourself up for failure. In the just that the place itself will not be safe. No space can be safe for everyone. Safety is not the thing that we should actually be going for. Safety assumes that none of us will be uncomfortable. Safety implies that every single person is held in the exact same way. But that also means that the most privileged, right, are able to bring in a lot of things that are really harmful to other people. And when they are uncomfortable, they could be like, this was unsafe for me, so we can't talk about this. We can't talk about the difference between a light-skinned brown person and a dark-skinned Black person because I feel uncomfortable, right? Most people connect that with safety. Don't have safe spaces, have generative spaces. Have spaces where you're actually supposed to be challenging one another, where it's meant to be, but not in a, okay, Black people, now you have to challenge everyone in this space, right? But more in the sense of like, actually, if anyone not Black is walking in, we're bringing anti-Blackness with us. And that recognition into that space, and this applies to any type of space, but recognizing that, of that we are all capable of doing harm, and we will all do harm, and we have to be able to sit with that and respond to one another and know what to do, that makes it generative. But assuming that it's going to be safe means we're going to, as long as humanly possible, pretend as if everything is fine in this space. Because we don't want to admit that actually we failed around the safety piece. But anti-Blackness will show up. If there's anyone who's not Black, it will show up at one point or another. If someone who is cis, right, if it's inclusive of trans women, which hopefully it is, harm will happen, right? Someone is lighter skinned than other people, harm will happen. Someone's more able-bodied, harm will happen. Harm is going to happen across all of those things. But building that into it of like, actually, but we're a generative space that specifically is centering the most marginalized to the most marginalized. And so it's not that the most marginalized is the afterthought, and we're going off of like what a cis, straight, light-skinned person thinks. We're going off of this Black, trans, disabled person as the bar. That is our bar. And when that happens, people start showing up towards that bar. Maybe they're getting a little bit like, they can't quite meet it, but that's very different than our bar is what the light-skinned, able-bodied cis woman thinks versus the Black, trans, disabled person. And so how you build it changes things, but also it doesn't have to be safe. There is no such thing. I can't think of a single place that is safe. And also, we think of safety in a multitude of ways, right? Obviously, this shouldn't be a place where people are shooting each other. That is not what I'm talking about when I say it's not a safe space in that way. But if you are going to use the language of safety, fully break it down, fully define it. Because to me, I'm not in a safe place if I can't ever be uncomfortable. I'm not in a safe space if I can't fuck up and know that the community is going to hold me accountable. That is safety for me. But most people view it the opposite. Safety is, how dare you make me uncomfortable by calling me out. Safety is, you have to be so nice to me because I fucked up. Whereas like in reality, in actual, real, beautiful community spaces, like someone fucks up, I'm gonna be like, hey, you fucked up. And they're not gonna go and be like, oh, how dare you, I despise you now. No, like we're in community. They're like, yeah, actually you're right. Right, like I wanna do better next time, right? This is what I will do. That's safety. But if we're afraid of punishment, if we're afraid of each other, that's not safety. And so if you want to use it, you can use it, just break it fully down. Here's what it means, here's what it doesn't mean, here's who it caters to. What is safety for a black, trans, disabled woman? If that's the identity you're going to go off of. And you can go deeper, right? There's like other things you can throw in there as other forms of marginalization, but what does safety look like for that? And how do you define that for the space? It's a great question. Did you have your hand up? Okay, we can take a quick final question. I'll try to be brief. Yeah, we love that. Strategic what, sorry? Yes. Yeah, it's a great question. So every single one of us has a role to play. Some of us are more aware than others about the role that we play. Some people are newer potentially to the movement, or they just haven't done that type of labor. So your existence in community serves a purpose. Every single one of us serves a purpose. So if, for example, and this is where like, if you organize like frontline organizing, like, and there's like different risk levels, there's strategy behind different risk levels. So generally, someone like me is not going to be at the highest risk of getting arrested and brutalized by the police, right? Ideally, it should be cis straight white people who are allies, who are kind of on the front lines because they're going to be treated differently. However, there's strategy in me being the person who does get beat up by the police and it's caught on camera, and that gets shared, and I do get arrested. There's a different level of power within that. The risk is higher. The brutality that will impact me is going to be higher than a cis straight white person. But that strategy of knowing that you getting arrested is different than me getting arrested. You interacting with the police is different than me interacting with the police. You interacting with Congress people is different than me interacting with Congress people. It's not saying that I should never do it and you should always do it, or this person should always do it. It's that there's power in every single person doing it. Every person here talking to the exact same person has very different power. There's different purpose in doing it. And so when it comes to martyrdom, right, and that does play a huge role in burnout, but because it's happening non-strategically. Non-strategic martyrdom is being like, I am uncomfortable with this genocide, and so I am throwing 100% of everything that I am into this today, and I will die by the end of this month. And that happens. Can it be strategic? Absolutely. If a person is like, the role that I get to play long-term in the movement is less than the role I can play in these next 2 weeks, right? And just speed everything up. Do things that I can't actually do in the next like 5 years. Strategy. However, if, for example, going back to the police, right? Of like, if I put myself at risk in a life and death situation, right? And I get killed tomorrow, strategically, that actually does not make sense. Because strategically, the movement actually does need my labor for the time being. For a lot of organizers, I will say, of like, sometimes doing this long term is the harder thing to do. Right? Because if I just have to do this for 2 weeks, right, and then I have an out, For a lot of people, that's actually a lot easier. The harder thing is to be like, actually, I need to be in this movement in 2030. Because if the world is still here in 2030, right? Like, and it's not even just about like building towards a revolution, right? Which builds us a liberated world. It's like, even if, for example, like I used to use this as an example of like, I wholeheartedly believe in a liberated world. It's going to happen. Whether we revolt, a revolution happens, whether a giant ass earthquake literally shatters half the world, destroys all of empire, right? And all the systems fall, but we're still not in a liberated world when that happens. We need to take care of each other when that happens. If we don't take care of each other, we build this world. If we don't show up then, if we don't organize then, we still end up here. Nothing has changed. Half the world is gone, but nothing has actually changed. There's labor when the revolution comes. There's labor to build the revolution. There's labor within the revolution, and then there's the labor after the revolution. There's labor in a liberated world. Because labor isn't a bad thing. Labor is just how we build community, how we invest in one another, how we invest in our spaces, all of those things. Labor is just labor. That's the harder one for a lot of people, including myself. Like, I'll be really honest with y'all. Like, and I've dealt with suicidality. I talk about psychosis in this book. I talk about like a lot of my journey and how that impacted where I am and how I view things. And also at the same time, strategically, martyrdom is not always the answer. Because if all of us martyr ourselves today, who's left? And sometimes that's strategic. Sometimes people martyring themselves is important work. I'm not saying never martyr yourself. I'm just saying be strategic. Let's never waste a single life. Let's never waste a single ounce of labor. Because we don't have endless supplies of it to do that, right? Like I said, of like what we're fighting against, literally like has billions of dollars to every, like honestly, like in the book it says to $100,000. Honestly, I don't even believe that. To like $1,000, they have $1 billion. We can't just throw $100 out there as if it's nothing. We need to spend that $100 strategically. But what we can do as marginalized people, especially the most marginalized, what I can do with $100, someone who doesn't understand marginalization can't do with 100,000. And we see that with the organizations, right? The organization I run, like, I mean, it's on the large end of a queer and trans Muslim org, but the work that we do and have done historically, compared to orgs 5 times bigger than us, is dozens of times more than the work that they have ever done, not even just in 1 year, but like in their entire histories sometimes. Because we know how to move. We know how to be effective and efficient in ways that they don't. But it also means that we have to actually not waste any of these things. And nothing is ever wasted. I can use everything, but like, so if someone does martyr themselves unstrategically, like we can still utilize that. And also, that's labor. That's additional labor for someone in the movement to go and have to make this happen. So it's just about strategy of what is it that actually impacts our world and us. There is no right or wrong. There is no one path or another. It's we all have a role to play. We all have power in everything that we do. Understanding that and knowing where that strategy is, that makes a difference. And I will say of like right now, we don't have that. Largely, we're not in communities where people really understand that. Like even in terms of like taking a break, to me, I'm like, there's strategy there. So like, I don't know how many of y'all have followed like my social media, but know that every single thing I post, there's strategy behind it. So if I go on camera and I'm like, joy, it's so beautiful, strategy. I go on and I'm like, depression, things are bad, strategy. It's not that any of it is a lie. All of it is a lie. But there are things I choose to bring forward, things I don't choose to bring forward, things I bring forward with certain people, things I don't bring in with other people, because strategy. Every single thing we do has power. And I find that the thing that we're lacking within our communities, for obvious reasons, basically systems of oppression really, really, really don't want us to do this. But we don't understand our power. Right? Systems of oppression want you to think that if you are marginalized, you have zero power. But liberation is not systems of oppression giving us power or them disappearing. Liberation is us literally claiming power that they tell us does not exist. But it's there. It's here today. But how many people in this room could be like, yeah, actually, I do fully know how powerful I fucking am. And I know exactly how to use that power. And I do so every single day. That's moving towards liberation. And that doesn't need systems of oppression to go away. That just needs us to fully claim that. And to me, that's how we build a liberated world. So thank you for that beautiful question. I want to end with this final thing, which is the dedication to this book, to Whispers Beneath the Orange Grove. It's a short dedication. It reads, "To the people whose lives require trigger warnings, may we be the trigger for the revolution." So I'll leave you with that prayer. And thank y'all for an awesome day. I'll sign some books. There's also some prints by me. And like I mentioned, 100% of the proceeds either goes to queer and trans Palestinians or queer and trans Indigenous people at Turtle Island. The funds from the prints, those ones go to where they're needed most across the different communities that I work with. But each of the books specifically goes to those two different areas. Thank y'all. Oh, and for purchasing the books, that happens through the store. Are we going to have them? I can take sales. Fabulous. Sales will be here. For the prints, there are QR codes. There's Venmo and there's a credit card link. But yeah, appreciate y'all. Thank you.